All right, welcome everyone to Kyoku's talk. Hold on here. Reverend Kyoku Tracey Walen began practicing Buddhism in 1998, the year that I was born. She was ordained in 2008 and given Dharma transmission by Byakuren Judith Ragir in 2015. She trained from 2008 to 2010 at Great Vow Zen Monastery. Currently, she resides at and supports Hokyoji and also serves as a Zen teacher at Clouds and Waters Zen Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. With that, I'd like to welcome my colleague, Kyoku. You're on mute, Kyoku.
One of the things I learned in morning Zazen was that there's a new feature that lets you have moving effects. So that's where the balloons came from. It's rather fun. So I'm glad to be with us today. Thank you very much, Bo, for standing in. I wasn't quite sure what to call my talk, what to label the file, but right now I'm just calling it just this. I woke up one morning, probably about a month ago, and there was a phrase in my head that just came in, and that phrase was, there is always and only now. I thought it was like one of those, well, I guess I'm waking up. But it's been with me just as a kind of koan since then. And so I decided that I would take it up as an exploration that might contribute to a talk. And somewhere, I don't know where now, I ran across a phrase. We don't perceive things as they are, but as we are. Then letting go of me, getting to know this. So that was a bit of my instruction to myself, and I share it with you because I found it useful. We don't perceive things as they are, but as we are. And I was prompted to look up, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And that was a phrase that came from a gentleman named Wayne Dyer, who I think does a lot of talks on the web. And then a little more aged and ancient from Marcel Proust. The real journey of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. So this contemplation of just this it sounds kind of dumb in a way. It's very simple. But I think as I've worked with it, it's rather profound. And as I was one day looking at it and letting it sink in, was moved to go online and say, how many moments are there in a 24-hour day? I've often used something like 8.5 million or billion. I can't remember. Dogen apparently had a number or an answer to that question. And I thought I might find it that way. But what I got was very interesting. There was a piece on moments, and it involved time And one of the phrases in the time belongs not to the atom or the universe, but to us. And as I understood what they were saying is actually we can't really define moments, even within the body. We know it takes a little time for something to happen, and then it has to get kind of handled by the brain. So automatically, whatever we're conscious of isn't this moment. It's this moment after the brain gets through trying to work with it. So time belongs not to the atom or the universe, but to us. In this piece, the write-up they said we actually do essentially for our purposes, we do define a moment around the amount of time it takes the earth to go fully around once. And that actually changes depending somewhat on weather conditions. It's changed over time. So what's the phrase? Let's see. Yeah, the brain does a ton of work, so we don't notice, and we kind of make up every instant that we think of as now. The brain actually either doesn't perceive it or changes or edits it out. So the brain just kind of takes what's coming at it, a lot of its function, and makes it work for us. But even though we have a measure of a moment, and we can use it a moment according to science, and we kind of need them. They have a lot of utility. We can't actually define when it starts and when it stops. So in the end, as they say, when is a moment begun? When is it finished? And how can you tell? And the answer to that is we can't. So this phrase, we don't perceive things as they are, but as we are, that's a kind of a powerful koan that I've been reflecting on and just trying to, I think, experience consciously moment. It actually takes longer for something happening in the foot to get to the brain than it does for something that's happening like, in your shoulder. So it's a useful, but the idea of a moment is just that. It's useful, but it's not real. we make it up to suit our purposes. A moment is only an idea. No beginning, no end, just disappears. So when there is only now, also undivided, undefined, and unmeasurable, that's a different place than we seemingly can operate. I mean, the brain seems to, from the very little I've studied it, the brain seems to be a largely engaged with trying to make sense of what's happening. But it in itself is not the thing that's happening. And thing is already, kind of just the best we can do to be able to talk about it. something else that came up from there is always and only now is something that Reb Anderson talked about in a piece called Where Joy Comes From, and something that's 1998, which relative to a lot of teachers I know and probably a lot of people that come to Hokyoji or come to sashins or go to Zen centers. There's a lot of people that have practiced longer than that. So I'm a relative beginner, but I do experience something that Reb talks about. And he says, essentially we experience getting tired of practice. Let me see how he puts it. He says, we feel like we're going through the motions. So I've had some of that. Particularly as I've in the more recent years, as I've grown older, then like all of us, our experience of the world changes, and it's affected by what we've already experienced, and our ideas of what we've experienced, what we remember. So that's all included in now. I find it helpful as a way of what unattaching from me. I recommend it. So Reb Anderson talks about this, and he says, when we feel like we're going through the motions, essentially we don't really enjoy the practice. And then it becomes like some sort of medicine. It tastes bad, but it's good for us. So we either force ourselves to do it or we stop practice. So I've experienced that, and I can be very fickle and inconsistent about my practice. And I tend to stand back and admire, like, they don't have that way of being with their practice. This says my internet connection is unstable. Okay, here we go. We're back to stable. Stably here, always reliably now. Anyway, so Reb talks about that. We either force ourselves to do it or we stop practicing. So he says, what's happening at that point is we don't understand that we have to rekindle our joy on a regular basis. Joy comes from practicing generosity. And without generosity, the practice goes flat. So, yeah, we all have, I mean, this is just part of normal living, isn't it? Things go flat. But where we go with that, particularly if they seem to stay, is essentially part of what Buddhist practice helps us with. Reb says the stoic or the neutral has its place. So this idea of equanimity, where we're not swayed, we're not panicked, we're not overtaken, we're not discouraged by what's happening in just this moment. We're steering through it with equanimity. It's such a lovely picture and so hard to do. I mean, suffering seems like it's pretty easy to do, pretty easy to identify, but not so much this joy. So you have to rekindle your joy on a regular basis. Joy comes from practicing generosity. And I think probably each one of us here right now can relate to that. It is joyful to be in a situation where we do give. But essentially, what he's talking about here is we have to create that motivation. Just that is part of the practice, is consciously being aware, and it brings our attention in many, many tiny ways. We begin to understand, I think, generosity, or we certainly can come to understand generosity that isn't quite so staid and maybe unalive as, being a good person, even though we might want to do that, and we might do that frequently and very genuinely. It can get stale. All right. The stoic or the neutral has its place, he says, but only once you're intimate with others and yourself. Now, that's a rather tricky matter, particularly with self, even though we're really taught by the Buddha to start with ourselves. And I think that's because it's always available, and it's something with which we can't live without. The brain is necessary, and the idea of self is necessary for functioning, for practicing. But he says, just to be present only works when you're not running away from the suffering of all beings. And that is familiar. We all hide from ourselves and from those around us. And it can be quite, it can use up a lot of energy. It can create an enormous amount of suffering, just an enormous amount of suffering. So we can talk about that, but boy, if we do sesshin right away, we can get in touch with I'm suffering, I'm not suffering, and notice it, even though it's pretty easy to find something else to do with this brain when we're in meditation. This concentration thing is not so easy. But Reb says, if we don't practice generosity, we lose the joy. And if we don't have joy, we lose the practice. That made, I found that inspiring, because I thought I'm often, in any given day, there are times when I'm aware of not being joyful, and I'll discover that I'm mucking about in some form or another of suffering, or I'll say ennui, but which is a little, I don't know, I like it better than boredom, but boredom's a synonym, that's for sure. I don't want life to be boring. I don't think any of us really do, but excitement comes in a lot of different forms, and some of them are much harder to appreciate than others. I was, here's Shunryu Suzuki in the book of his talks entitled Not Always So. Real freedom is to not feel limited when wearing this Zen robe, this troublesome formal robe. Similarly, in our busy life, we should wear this civilization without being bothered by it, without ignoring it, without being caught by it. Now that's a wonderful way of talking about dynamic functioning, and a huge challenge, right? It really does take practice. I don't always notice. I don't always notice how being neglectful about my practice, skipping meditation on a day, um, reading a book, talking to a friend, maybe that has some generosity in it, maybe that has some joy in it. But oftentimes it's just something to do, or all that time that we spend in our real lives, emptying the garbage and riding buses and going to the bathroom, doing stuff that doesn't feel alive, that doesn't capture our hearts. So when I reflect upon what he says about if we don't practice generosity, we lose joy. And if we don't have joy, we lose the practice. I can verify that in my own experience. And I think that being aware of where our energy is. I read someplace that the 7 factors of enlightenment are really about sort of practice pick-me-uppers and craziness slower downers. And of course, that includes meditation and lots of it, and lots of it. So in our busy life, we should wear this civilization without being bothered by it, without ignoring it, without being caught by it. That's a lot of fluidity, and it's a tremendous amount of attention. And is it a tremendous amount? Amount is maybe a way of expressing it, but not the experience of it. But we miss joy when we don't have access to it. I think one of the things that Hokyoji kind of automatically offers is some amount of equanimity and joy with seamless no effort. There's a kind of call and response in my experience. One of my friends says that every time she turns into the Hokyoji driveway, she oftentimes gets tears because it's like she puts down her burdens. It's like she doesn't even have to put them down. They just aren't there anymore. So I think that there's places when they're filled with practice that can offer that to us. So a little bit about, I guess, one more teaching that comes from Taejo Munich, who is one of Katagiri's successors and is in, I think it's North Carolina, where she is a teacher at a Zen center there that I've had a chance to visit and a chance to practice at. This comes from a wonderful book that is a compilation of female Buddhist teachers of our time. It includes Byakuren, who all of us, I think, know and have had experience with. This comes from a piece that Taejo Munich wrote about. To some degree, she was dealing with koans, but it's entitled "Right Effort, Learn Law." She begins by talking about having flying dreams. She said she had 3 of them, and it started out with a young girl asking her in her dream to take her flying. And in each dream, the flying became more free and capable. And I didn't realize it when I started this. I was taken by learning to fly, but I've had a lot of flying dreams, and it's common for us to have flying dreams, at least in the small sample I've taken of people that I've talked to about dreams. But what happened in her dream is the same thing that would happen in mine. It would vary. So sometimes I would start out, picture myself on my stomach, just, sort of basically in the dirt and trying to get enough wind going under my arms as I, flap them, try to get them going so that I could get some levitation. And sometimes I got nowhere, which was her first dream. And sometimes I'd be able to get, maybe a foot above the ground, but I couldn't actually get enough lift to go. And then other times I would succeed in getting from this kind of and finally go down the runway and get to do some swooping and flying. And this was the same experience she had in her dreams, but also to some degree when she took her aspirations for practice to Japan and was at Hokyoji Monastery. And here's some of the things she says about that. I was so used to having time when I could do as I wished that I felt this lifestyle to be very restricting because there isn't an unscheduled moment, I don't think, in a lot of Japanese monasteries. There were things I just didn't enjoy doing. So this is just like life, right? This is really in a very fine-grained, continuous way, experiencing life without having views, right? But it's not very easy to do until you've had quite a bit of training in it. So she says, there were things I didn't enjoy doing. My only options were to follow the schedule or to leave. So I recognize this. There's a way in which it's like, well, this is impossible. Why am I doing it? Whose idea was this? Why did I think this would be a good idea? But it kind of comes down to, what are your other options? It's like, return to the thing that drove me into this practice to begin with is my answer to that. So that's what I'm picking up on there. I was motivated to be there, but my effort didn't get me very far off the ground. Things did become easier. Resistance subsided a bit. Still, my effort was greater than any results I was seeing. Resistance was still present. I was still only 4 feet off the ground. And then she goes through a series of, takes us, further into her experience of the time she spent there, including doing takahatsu. So here's where I start to get an inkling of what Reb's talking about when he says, if we practice without joy, then that's problematic, and we have to be conscious and diligent and disciplined about rekindling joy. So in a sense, takahatsu, even though it has its own kind of robe about it, its own kind of container that feels restricting, we can still get off the ground. We can still begin, as she says, to say yes, to just say yes. I think I'm forgetting the name of the person, the woman that started Shasta Abbey in the West Coast, but she wrote a book called Everyday Zen. And near the end, there's a story where a teacher gives a student the instruction to, no matter what arises, say, "Thanks for everything. I have no complaints whatsoever." So that's as I contemplate, well, what is this practice of just being present and awake, and joyful and generous and equanimous in the way we can move through the day. I want to end what I'm saying with a Dogen. This comes from a Dogen teaching, which I carry deeply within me. It's from Dogen's Vow for Awakening, also known as Eihei Kosu Otsuganman. At some point, I'm going to ask Aren how to pronounce those, since she's teaching people. She's taken Japanese. So here's the part, at the very last part of the Dogen's Vow for Awakening is, I think, the practice that I gives is the aim I have. Quietly explore the farthest reaches of these causes and conditions, as this is the exact transmission of a verified Buddha. Repenting in this way, one never fails to receive profound help from all Buddhas and ancestors. Revealing and disclosing one's lack of faith and practice, the power of this revelation melts away the roots of transgression. This is the pure and simple color of true practice, of the true mind of faith, and the true body of faith. So I think it's one of our 2 noon sutras that we normally chant, where there's a line that says, "The ancient sages grieved for them and offered them the Dharma." And that refers back to, I think, or I connect it with the Buddha's awakening that we talk about and learned from in Rohatsu. So when he awakened and he was visited by another celestial being who said, "Please teach this, what you've just realized, please teach this." And the Buddha is skeptical. He says, "That would be wearying. There's not very many people that don't have sand in their eyes." And then his helper angel says, "Take another look." And he decides that he will do as asked. He will take on this wearying task because there are some people with eyes open. So I'm not separate. You're not separate. We are not separate from the Buddha. And the process of exploring the farthest reaches of these causes and conditions, as this is the exact transmission of a verified Buddha. So taking what to me comes to my heart is this is really staying exactly here and now, and being with it, being willing to look at it completely openly. No, nothing left out. And however much of that I have ideas about, however much of that I can do, is a kind of repentance, because I can see at increasingly subtle levels, not all the time, but more often than if I didn't do it, I can see where suffering comes from, where suffering arises, and where it doesn't have to be. If as I change the way I look at it, it also changes. I have new eyes. I have new eyes there. So, but those new eyes, yeah, repenting in this way will never fails to receive profound help from all Buddhas and ancestors. That help is continuously offered, whether I'm awake enough, I'm attentive enough, I'm diligent enough to stay with it, because it's not always something that I like. It often isn't, but it often is. So that widening of awareness, that commitment to being present continuously, is also necessary for joy. It's just necessary for joy. And the Eightfold Path, which includes right speech and right livelihood, right action, all of those things are the very training that's needed, the very practice that's needed in order to really realize how things are, to realize freedom. Until we know the many ways, the many me's that are involved in the arising of suffering, and really committing ourselves. So repenting, yes, it's very dismaying. It's very dismaying. Sometimes just shockingly, angrily realized what's actually going on and how it actually works, and how much me is involved, and how different it is when me just isn't a thing. Which is not to neglect the me. It's simply, what was it called? It's being fluid. So not being bothered by it, not ignoring it, and not being caught by it. That's a pretty continuous process. And then, so repenting in this way one never fails to receive profound help from all Buddhas and ancestors. And that always, always, always almost makes me cry, because I can see, the more I practice in this now, how much me is involved, and how suffering arises, and how it continues, and how it can be extinguished. And then not just saying, oh, I'm so sorry, right? We probably all both been in the position of saying, oh, I'm so sorry, and not really feeling like we can make up for something that we suddenly really kind of got that was hurtful to somebody else. Sometimes very innocently, other times very, just realizing how mean we can be, how much unbeautiful stuff is there. Revealing and disclosing one's lack of faith and practice. So that's the part where I think we really take it to heart. We really look at it we really hold it as our own. We own it, and we develop the practice of working with that. It's like, let's get smarter about that. Whether it's speech, I still remember somewhere in my first, I don't know, 3-ish years of practice, realizing I need to give up sarcasm. I just need to give it up. And mourning that, really mourning that, it really appealed to me. And without practice, I don't think I'd ever be able to see that. It still happens. It's there. The training's there. But that was a kind of realization. That's the kind of realization that can make our lives and our contributions to other lives so much more healthy, nurturing. Yeah. So revealing and disclosing one's lack of faith and practice, the power of this revelation melts away the roots of transgression. So that's such a beautiful, and it seems like accurate way. When we see differently, all of a sudden what we were seeing just isn't there. It's it's one of those things that once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And that is that's where the burn is when it comes to the First Noble Truth, realizing exactly how it works and how much responsibility we have and how we're the only person that can really change that. Then this is the pure and simple color of true practice, of the true mind of faith and the true body of faith. Yeah. It's simple, but not at all easy. And yet, if we are willing to put some effort into stepping out of our idea of time, then we can always be just here, just fully here. And in that way, we're never separate from joy. And we're always practicing in a way that brings joy to ourselves and others. So we have quite a bit of, we have some time. Looks like something like 10 minutes. And I'd love to hear you all talk a little bit about how you take care of your practice. What do you do when you get discouraged? How do you, how it looks when you lose your energy or your focus, how you work with that, how you feel about it, and how you rekindle joy. So I'm hoping somebody, more than one of you, only one of you, will say something about that. Thank you for listening.
I guess I'll try to say my thoughts about it. Usually, for me, I think like the go-to is just go on retreat. Like that's just kind of my default. Like whenever I'm kind of feeling low on practice or I'm not feeling energized, I try to do like either a day-long retreat or a weekend retreat or just something to really just to settle my body and settle my mind. And even if it's not I don't look at it as trying to rejuvenate my practice, but I just look at it as trying to find different joy than kind of through the usual means of like caffeine or this and that. So that's one way. And I think something that I'm getting a little better at is like if I'm not interested in reading something like Buddhist specific or practice specific, reading something like specific adjacent. So like an example, and my friend bought me a book called All About Love by Bell Hooks. And it's like, it's doesn't really talk about meditation practice or anything, but it's really, reflections about love, and something along that lines just helps me become a more aware and open person. And that's something that practice does. And so I kind of look at that as like, it doesn't rejuvenate. Like, I don't look at it as like I'm reading it for my Buddhist practice, but it really like what the practice points towards. I try to do other entertaining or different means of getting around to that.
Well, thank you, brave person, talking about your practice. I appreciate that. Who else?
So when I was about 35, I determined that my life as an adult was going to be ruled by being cheap, dull, and boring. And I have really worked at that. So I've kind of embraced being cheap, dull, and boring, but not always completely successful. So I just kind of, it's like, I find the meditation practice is a lot like my exercise practice. I just get up in the morning and I get on a rowing machine for half an hour and I take a shower and then I sit for 40 minutes. It's just something that happens every day, and every day is a little different. And some days are very flat and some days are not so flat. It just becomes part of a habit. If you just get up and do it, it's part of your life. So this recent wedding that I attended has really shaken me up in a lot of ways, because I see that I have a very simple life, and I was interacting with all these people that I'm kind of marginally related to, and some of them I really wanted to see, and some of them we had really genuine, authentic conversations, and others haven't, cleaned up their act so much, and it's like just kind of small talk. But it's kind of coming back to my quiet life. I realized I kind of miss all that stimulation in some ways, because there was all this, it's like a week of constant talking, and all of a sudden I'm back to being quiet again, and it's very different, and I can't resume my normal schedule for various reasons, because I put off a lot of things. So there's early morning appointments, and I can't get on to my usual shifts at the volunteer kitchen, and so I'm not quite back to being on an even keel, but it's like just trying to find that even keel again. So I think a lot of this comes from my dad, who was very I didn't know the word equanimous when I was growing up, but my dad was like the epitome of being equanimity oriented. If something needed to be done, he just went ahead and did it, whether it was fun or whether it was difficult. If there was something that needed to be done, he just did it. So I think that's kind of been embedded in my psyche, that just You just do things. So a lot of things with this wedding thing being taken off for a week is like, oh, I can't do that until I get back. I can't do that until I get back. So now I'm back, and I'm very busy doing all those things that I put off before I took off. So, but there seems to be this drive to get back to normal, but I'm debating whether there's actually a normal anymore. So that's a whole nother topic. So
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Kim, do you have anything that you would be willing to share?
I feel like I'm in that advanced university class when I haven't done my assignment. Because it's actually quite relevant as I think about it, because like Jan, I function best when I've got my routine going. And so if I get up and do my set of stretching exercises and go sit, then I can go to the gym after that and have the important things out of the way. But that schedule has gotten disrupted for an extended period. And what I find myself turning to, saying, I just acknowledge that the regular activity is going to be tossed off schedule for the foreseeable future, and just try to make sure that I'm implementing what I would be doing or trying to develop if I were practicing at that time. And that's to say that focusing on how I do interact with other people, focusing on where my attitudes are going. I guess it would be exercising mindfulness, awareness, and making sure that there's generosity and selflessness in those activities. And so we talk about practice, and I usually associate that with regularly sitting, getting up and going to sit whatever 4 or 5 days a week, or at a practice period or a session. But I think that there's this other aspect of it, there's practice realization. So I stick with the realization part of it and say, oh, that's practice. That's what my practice is now. Let's focus on that and put a good amount of effort into it. So that's what I got for you.
Thank you. Well, part of what motivated this talk is when I was ordained, I was given a box of cards that had various calligraphies. And on the back of each one, there's a verse, there's a calligrapher's comment about it, and then there's a commentary by John Dido Lori Roshi. And I periodically will turn over, there's about, I don't know, probably less than 100, but more than 50 cards in there. And this one was sort of like the saying about there is always and only now. This says, concentration within activity excels that within stillness 100,000 million times. And Dido Lori says, the still point of Zazen, once established, lives in all of our activities, whether we're sitting or standing, working or eating. So it sounds to me like you're working on that part where you're taking it back into the world. and where it is, it's just plain harder to be out there in there. And how else would we, it reminds me for some reason of Tiger Woods as a golfer. So it's one thing to go out and practice and do all your golf shots and refining all your moves on your own. But then all of a sudden, if you're in a tournament and there's lots of people around and they're talking to you and they're yelling at you and they're reporting on you, and you're like a nervous wreck on the inside, then you need practice with that too. We all do. Thanks.
Yes. Okay. I just one thing to add that struck me as you were talking is that I did experience a point in a day recently where it's something that sometimes you see in small children, and sometimes I guess in adults, but I think of it in small children more often, where everything just stopped. I was at a gathering of sorts, and I was in the lobby of this event, and I just stopped. I stopped walking, and I stopped being in touch with anything that was going on around me, and it was a very meditative moment. And those things, when you hit an honest to goodness, when that happens to me, that's really a good thing. Maybe except if I'm driving, of course. That's not good. But if I'm standing in line at the grocery store, or if I'm out for a walk, or if I'm doing something around the house, and then just all of a sudden, just everything stops. That's to me, one of the most important and impactful things that can happen with regards to practice realization. And so having those experiences occur in the absence of a formal structured practice is to me very, very valuable and well, invaluable, and something that can happen in the absence of structured practice.
The structure of unstructure. Hey, Ren, do you want to say anything? I know that we're getting close to closing time, but
yeah, no, I'm struck by the question. It's a good question. I was taken by Jan's what is it? Cheap, dull, and boring. Did I get that right? I'll hang on to that. I aspire to it. I guess my practice lately has, as you mentioned, it had to do with language learning, and I find that if there's a lot of oh my gosh, this is gonna come out wrong, I can't actually think much about the thing I'm trying to produce, and cheap, dull, and boring are wonderful contributors to being able to focus on a thing. So thank you, Jan, and thank you very much for your talk, Kyoku. I appreciate it very much.
my pleasure. Along with that, one thing I should mention, and I know we got to close, is Fish Murphy is here leading Clouds on Water session. She's here from where she lives in Portland, and she's teaching Shantideva, but she's got a handout called 3 Practices for Enthusiasm. So, just briefly, for example, analyze cause and effect, notice an emotional event, charity, giving of yourself to benefit others, mindfulness. And she's got 8-10 things under each one of them that I think are just really helpful aids. So if you want, since I know all of you and I know where to find you, I'd be happy to send copies of it just to fuel your. All right. Okay. Okay, take it away, Bo.
All right. Thank you very much, Kyoku, for your talk and the lovely discussion afterwards. Next week, we have the Jewel Mirror Sesshin. I will be the Tenzo, so if you want some pretty okay cooking, come along and have some meals. After that, we have Ken Ford's Memorial, August 24th. I don't know if there's a Zoom option or not. If somebody can confirm that with me. I don't know. Okay. No Zoom option for the memorial. And then after that, August 26th to September 2nd, we have Compassionate Ocean coming down for a session. And with that, we will close with the 4 vows. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you all.